My name is Walter Zweifel, and you know the spelling, so Zweifel. I'm the news editor of Radio New Zealand International, which is a shortwave radio station that broadcasts on the internet and on shortwave. And it's a small organization that essentially covers South Pacific affairs for a South Pacific audience. That means we collect information from the small island countries, roughly between Papua New Guinea and French Polynesia and in between, and we rebroadcast information that is news and current affairs to that region. We have a little outlet on the domestic radio network, which is like the equivalent of public radio in the US, which is Radio New Zealand, and we have a small slot there where we have Pacific news for the domestic audience, plus current affairs program, 15 minutes every night on things happening in the Pacific region. The audience is in general, the South Pacific population. What you need to know is that a lot of the Pacific Island countries are very small.
Yeah.
Some countries have just, a few thousand inhabitants or a couple 100,000 inhabitants. So many of these countries are, they are in terms of development, most of them, or just about all of them, are third world countries. So they've got very limited resources, and it also means they've got limited media. What that translates into is that there is a lack of human capital, there's a lack of capacity in terms of broadcasting infrastructure and so on. So what we do here is we provide, if we can almost say like first world standard in terms of covering news. And given that we are not beholden to any one sort of single country, we try to find out what is the most important story happening in each individual country, plus what is significant development in the region. So if there is a fisheries conference that affects all countries because they're into fishing industry, so we would be an outfit that would try to cover that. And being a little bit like a switchboard, we amass the information from the entire region, compile a regional news bulletin and broadcast it to them. So if you, for example, live in Fiji and you will hear through us, you will hear what is going on in Papua New Guinea or in Solomon Islands. Whereas if you live in Fiji and the local radio will only tell you essentially what's going on in Fiji because they haven't got the resources to figure out what's going on in Papua New Guinea. And we are sort of like a step back, overlooking the whole region and pooling all that information together. There is another radio station that does similar work, and that is Radio Australia, which is the Australian Broadcasting Corporation's shortwave service. So there are two main radio stations that do this sort of regional coverage. We are now sort of, by virtue of doing this for so long, the specialists for South Pacific affairs. Our program is also relayed partly by the BBC in the region because they haven't got the reporters and the networks. So we're a little bit specialized in this niche.
Yeah.
Apart from there being a large number of radio stations, the number of networks is not that big, because what happens is that there are like a couple of networks that have FM relays all over New Zealand. So there are a couple of commercial companies that hold the biggest share of commercial radio land, and they then have in just about every city, they syndicate and play out the same music or the same sort of information. There is a public radio in New Zealand, which is Radio New Zealand, which is the old radio before commercial radio came in, and public radio is still in New Zealand, despite this huge fragmentation, is still the number one radio station. That's the Radio New Zealand, and it's probably not number one in Auckland. No, it's probably not number one. It must be another commercial station that is number one. But in Wellington, the capital, the domestic radio, Radio New Zealand, is the number one station. The big difference is that the public radio stations have no commercials. There's no ads. There's no interruption for sponsorship, God knows whatever. Whereas all the commercial radio stations, they have to make their money by having ads. And that is translated into, the weather is sponsored by, whatever, an outlet selling televisions, and a real estate agent will sponsor this and the bank that, whatever. So the whole output has sponsorship because that's how they make their money and stay afloat, whereas public radio gets taxpayers' money, and that is, clears the deck for the need to have any commercials. In terms of radio, what I should say, just to make clear how it is possibly different from radio in the US, what we don't have here is sort of overtly biased political talk radio. I mean, there is no Rush Limbaugh type radio here. There is none of that, because the ethos of Radio New Zealand is it's got to be impartial and balanced. So all radio stations essentially try to present a whole range of views. And we on public radio, we have to be balanced. That is the chart that we have to do. It means, for example, in the context of an election, that you have to give the main parties equal minutes of airtime and equal numbers of stories. In more or less, you can't have, as I know, for example, Fox News, has to promote the Republican Party candidate, by ratio 4-1. Here it would be against the chart. You can't do that, and it's not in the journalistic ethos here to favor one side over the other. So that's a big difference in the media landscape.